Okay, so welcome everybody, both internationally on the live stream and here in Aalborg, to this first Leonardo Laser Talk series at Aalborg University, Denmark. Sorry, what was that? We already have oh no, excuse me. I am Morten Sondergaard. I'm the director of the Erasmus Media Arts Cultures program and the coordinator of the Laser Talks program of the Relate research group here at Aalborg University. The Leonardo ISAST Lasers are a program of international gatherings that brings artists, scientists, humanists, and technologists together for informal presentations, performances, and conversations with the wider public. The mission of the lasers is to encourage contribution to the cultural environment of a region by fostering interdisciplinary dialogue and opportunities for community building to over 40 cities around the world. And this then is number 41 city. So this is, as I said, the first laser talk at Aalborg University. And in this series that we are proposing and starting today, we are making inquiries into the transitory practices of art and technology and their cultures. So what is the status of the transitory practices and their regimes of information technologies today? In this two-day symposium, of which the Laser Talks is part, the micropom, or the politics of machine, the micro edition, in Aalborg will untangle this question through the eyes of established and emerging media art practitioners and scholars. Revisiting Susan Lee Starr's notion from 1996 of transition regimes, the symposium re-evaluates the shifts occasioned by widespread and ubiquitous new technologies. Where are we with these transitions today, and what is the role of media art in those transitions? During the Laser Talks, the thematics and challenges of transition regimes are discussed in conversations between various researchers and artists. And the first panel that you are now welcome to invites Tanja Toft A. and Mogens Jacobsen and Alessandro Ludovico to discuss the history and current developments of media art in Denmark within and in relation to Scandinavia and international media art scenes. In the second panel tomorrow, which is Wednesday 11, at 10 to 11:30, the time here in Denmark, Max Hadler, Hans Christian Gilje, Diana Pankova, and Maria Højlund will bring forward current developments from their respective practices as well. But before introducing the speakers, a note on cultures. In the words of Starr, more or less. Culture is a word like society with a number of unfortunate definitional and philosophical problems associated with it. It is an easy concept to reify or make monolithic, make monolithic easy to freeze or concretize what is in fact always a series of complex motions and improvisations. The intent in using the word cultures in this context is to call attention to the multiple non-monolithic sense in which we are trying to talk about a set of practices with symbolic and communal meaning. At the same time, we could think of culture in another meaning altogether, as in cultural milk or yogurt, a small organism that affects changes over time. So, with those words, I want to introduce our speakers, and I want to introduce all of them in the first round here, and then we will pass on. I will pass on the word to our first speaker in a moment. And the first speaker is indeed Mogens Jacobsen, a Danish media artist who has been working with digital art, objects, and installations since the early 90s, and he was also one of the pioneers of Danish internet art. In 1992, he co-founded the Danish net art collective, the Art Node Foundation. His works focus on the temporal and material aesthetics of systems, processes, instructions, and code. His artworks often take the form of machines or devices that critically and humorously examine technology in our everyday lives, coping with technology. So Mogens Jacobsen's work, as we will also get demonstrated today, has been exhibited at numerous international and national venues, among others, Media Arts Festivals in Japan, FILE in Brazil, ZKM in Germany, the Transmediale in Germany, and the Ars Electronica in Austria. Next in line is Tanya A., who is a curator and researcher focused on perceptual experience, memory, and technogenesis in relation to media art and urban media aesthetic phenomena. She is the chair of the ICEA International Advisory Committee and co-founder of the Urban Media Art Academy. Having developed her research through visiting scholarships at School of Creative Media at City University of Hong Kong, Columbia University, the New School in New York, and Kunstfach University of Arts, Crafts, and Design, the Curator Lab, she is currently a postdoc researcher at Center for Art and as Forum, University of Copenhagen. And finally, but not least, we have Alessandro Ludovico, who is a researcher, artist, and chief editor of Neural magazine since 1993. He received his PhD degree in English and media from Anglia Ruskin University in Cambridge. He is associate professor at the Winchester School of Art, University of Southampton, and he has published and edited several books and has lectured worldwide. He's also served as an advisor for the Documented 12th magazine project, and he's one of the authors of the award-winning Hacking Monopolism trilogy of artworks. And also, I would say that Mogens Jacobsen and Alessandro Ludovico, together with me, has curated the temporary library of media art publications in Denmark, which will be launched after this laser talk. And with these words, I would give the floor and the microphone and the word to Mogens Jacobsen. Please join us, Mogens.
Thanks. I'm supposed to get the mic from you.
Yes.
And get my previous order.
I will do that. I'm sorry about that.
Super. Is this live? It sounds like I'm extremely high in the room, but then I will whisper. Thanks for the invitation. Thanks for the introduction. Hi out there. Those of you who are looking at the stream, Tanya, I can see you. Well, it was really, really difficult to find a title for this presentation, so I ended up with this strange title. So it's this negative title because it could be called Media Art End of Life PowerPoint Presentation, which I probably have shortened it to. And when I do this, it's like changing a slide. Okay, I'm an artist. Some would say a media artist. Morten just said so. But at least I am a practicing artist. I make and exhibit objects. And my presentation here today will be on my personal thoughts, my personal doubts, not as an academic, but as an artist. And hopefully, if we have the time, I will show an older piece of mine, not physically present, but in slides. Well, I have always had this really bad gut feeling when people called me interactive artist. Morten knows that. Digital artist, media artist. And some years ago, I stopped calling myself any of these terms. So and it was based on this gut feeling I had, there's something wrong here. So I was really pleased when I found this article, even if it was in German, in a German newspaper, Frankfurter Allgemeine, by the German writer Stefan Heidenreich. And it was called, the title was Es gibt gar kein Medienkunst, which I would translate to media art does not exist at all. And of course, such a statement triggered a huge debate online about what was he meaning. But let me sum up some of his arguments. First of all, media art is not an inclusive term, but it is an excluding term. By calling yourself a media artist, you assign yourself to this small exclusive group, which is great as long as it adds some value to what you do. For example, by stating that you are at the forefront of something new and sort of an avant-garde. But the newness of media art has passed. And as Heidrich states, this has left media artists as a small, in a very small, unattractive niche in the art world, with very little or no attention from critics, galleries, museums, or collectors. A sort of self-chosen exile, ivory tower, a safe space, but a lonely space outside critique. Again, this might still have been okay if media art had been a defining factor in the new technologies and the cultural use of new technologies. But these things were overrun by money, by venture capital and entrepreneurs. So media art media didn't get any importance in either the tech world, the cultural world, or the art world. Heidrich also says that media art is passé. The new in media art is over. Media art was a period. And today, we see a lot of artists working with whatever media or material that fits them without being labeled by their chosen material. No, not yet. There's a lot of famous artists working with media technology that could easily be described as media artists. They would fit nicely within the frame. It could be names like Olafur Eliasson, Jesper Just, Jeppe Hein, Camille Henrot, Philippe Perreno, Pierre Hugues. So, instead of describing myself as belonging to media art, I prefer to describe myself as an artist working with technology, which has a history. It's an old thing. I'm a great fan of Duchamp, especially these rotary things, these rotating things he did. I also like something completely different, the Greek artist Takis, who's mainly known for his work with magnets. And of course, we all, hopefully all know the experiment in art and technology in the States. So I was asked to talk about transitions, but I would like to talk about transitions in technologies, which is basically what we talk about when we talk about industrial revolutions. You might have seen this illustration before. If you go to Google and search for industrial revolutions, you will get this image on page 1, I guarantee you. I changed it a bit, but this is sort of the standard illustration of industrial revolutions. We have the first industrial revolution where powered by steam, production became mechanical. And the second production, the conveyor belt, mass production powered by electricity. And then in our time, we have this automated production using electronics and IT tech. And we're moving towards what is called smart or intelligent production with a lot of cloud, IoT, big data, machine learning things. But then I added there might be a competing industry or technology competing for the fourth, perhaps the fifth industrial revolution, the biotech and the nanotech technology with CRISPR and bioprinters. I don't know if they're in parallel or bio are following. So, next slide. Something important happened for me here towards, I don't know, probably towards the end of the third industrial revolution. The internet, and especially the web, became available for all of us. So as Morten said, in the early 90s, I became involved in internet art. My interest in internet-based art can really well be described by this famous diagram by the group MTTA. It's not mine, it's something they published in 97. I was never really interested in the visuals, what happened at the monitor at home at people. I was interested in something in between what I did and what my audience did. The network itself, the connectedness. And you said we started ArtNote in 92, and that's true. We tried to convince people we started in 92. But for real, we published in 94, I guess, this website by a Danish art group. So this is our website in 2005, 10 years after we started. And if you look closely, very closely, you can find a piece by me on the image. It's the black thing down in the corner. This is not a visual thing. It's not a great, fantastic visual thing, but it was like this open area where everybody could type something that would stay on the website until somebody changed it. And please remember, but this is 2005. Social networking was not that kind of out in Denmark yet. So this became our micro social network thing, social media thing. A lot of people were actually using it, and some were even debating things down here. But then again, in the 90s, net art was new with a capital N. It was fresh, vibrant, attracting a lot of new artists, especially, or perhaps interestingly, a lot from the Eastern European bloc. So it was like this creative utopia, free, accessible, non-commercial, a new open world controlled by nobody or by us, a platform for anybody, at least anybody who had internet access. So we were the internet hippies. And perhaps we were naive and as techno-positive as this fantastic poem by Richard Brautigan from 67 tells us. And I stumbled upon this, I think we should hear and read it. And we hope the sound works.
I like to think, and the sooner the better, of a cybernetic meadow where mammals and computers live together in mutually programming harmony like pure water touching clear sky. I like to think, right now please, of a cybernetic forest filled with pines and electronics where deer stroll peacefully past computers as if they were flowers with spinning blossoms. I like to think, it has to be, of a cybernetic ecology where we are free of our labors and joined back to nature, returned to our mammal brothers and sisters, and all watched over by machines of loving grace.
I hope you all have the image inside your brain now, this meadow with machines and deers and sunshine and flowers everywhere. But of course, this utopia did not last, and we sort of lost the internet. The internet became a commercial space with a lot of exchange of commodities and services. It became the social web where, if we should be very negative, and I'm extremely negative today, you are the product, you are the commodity. Which is not to say that the internet is not an interesting art space. There is a lot of this, the internet as a ubiquitous place, as this post-internet movement are using the internet. Also, there is a lot of performers on social media, like Artwork 666 and Amalia Ullmann on Instagram, follow her. But it all ended up in 2010 when I decided to change my practice or change my focus. I was still interested in the link in between the rules, the software, the regulation, the connectedness, the algorithms, the code. But I moved away from screen-based things and the net and began looking at older technological devices, older interfaces. And I filled scrapbook with images of test equipment and lab instruments. So my work began to take the form of devices, as Morten said. This is one of my pieces. Or test setups, physical machines filled with information, still filled with information technology, running algorithms and often connected using IoT protocols. But with a look, the physical presence of older technologies. That's a super quick run through of my things. So at a show in Berlin, an old friend of mine, the composer Frieder Putzmann, please look him up if you're interested in super strange music. He called what I was doing improved apparata. Devices as they could be, not as how they are or how they should be, but sort of a proposal, and with this retro look, sort of a speculative past. And of course, I also looked at older computers, especially this IBM System 360 or 360. And we all have this image of the mainframe computers from sci-fi movies, but this is the real thing. It is an extremely important computer system. It is the first modular, commercially available computer system from 64, 65. The first one was sold in 65. Yeah, and besides what it does, how it changed how we work and things like that, I became interested in the visuals of it. The industrial design, the rectangular shapes, the colors of it is blue, red, and yellow, the black framing. And you shouldn't know too much about art when you say, this is modernism, this is Mondrian. So when I asked IBM who designed the visuals of this, nobody knew it, but it's clearly a reference to or adaptation or stealing from Mondrian. So in 2014, I did my own version of this. I did my own computer. This is a piece called S360. This is my adaptation, homage, or perhaps a parody of the original IBM system. And of course, it also has a blue side. This is the other side, yes. I had to make a lot of these interface things because physical devices, physical things were quite, or interface things were quite different in 65, and you cannot not get these lamps anymore. They didn't have LEDs in 65. So I did all these small tubings with LED inside them. But of course, I'm still mainly working with the algorithm, what happens inside the code. And mine was running a super simple, small machine learning algorithm inside. Actually, and this is sort of my joke, inside there was a really cheap, really small IBM ThinkPad laptop running the whole thing. But it was a machine learning, text generating machine learning algorithm trained on Karl Marx texts and Adam Smith. So the algorithm would try to write new text based on these two seminal writers. These are some of the interface elements that I had to do. All the lamps myself, and some of the knobs I had to cast myself. But I tried to keep the look as close to the original IBM as possible. The typography, the coloring, the looks. Of course not the labels. If you look right, I hope you can see these on the stream, my strange, absurd writing on the labels. So the labels were not the original. And the original IBM, of course, did not have a screen mounted anywhere. The output was this typewriter thing, but I needed to communicate what was happening inside the machine to people visiting the exhibition. So I mounted a display here, and this is a very small, I think it's a 7-inch CRT device, black and white. Actually, it's a television from a caravan, a mobile home. because I wanted this super flimsy, unsharp, low fidelity, unstable look. And I had tried to emulate it in software, but nothing beats bad old technologies in doing these things. And then the interactive stuff. Basically, there was a lot of controls you could do that just changed how the look of the machine was. But there were two main controls on the operator's panel, where you could turn off for Karl Marx, or you could turn off for Adam Smith, and thus influence how much liberalism versus versus Marxism there should be in the generated text. And finally, you could ask the machine to print out a sort of cash register receipt. It was all dealing with economy, so I think it would be quite fitting to make it like a printout from a cash register and take home. And that was my presentation. Thanks a lot. We're sharing the mic.
Yeah. Yeah, I need this more. Hello.
I have it in my pocket.
Okay, so thank you very much, Mogens. I don't think I'm getting any sound out of this, but now I want to pass the word to Tanya, who is ready on Zoom, I think. No? Can you hear us, Tanya? Is she? Yeah. But can she hear us?
Isn't the problem the...
Maybe.
Can I try it now? Yeah.
Hello?
Wait a second.
Yeah. Hello?
I don't hear anybody.
Okay, don't turn off.
I heard moans.
Okay, that's interesting.
Can you hear me?
I feel like I should hear you in order for you to hear me.
Yes. Men hvor er hun henne? Er der nogen, der kan hjælpe mig med det? Where is she?
I could try the volume.
Thank you so much. Okay.
Yes.
Can you hear me, Tanya?
Yes. And you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you too. So, thank you very much, Mogens. And now I'm giving you the word, Tanya, and the screen as well. With Tanya, of course, Tanya A is on Zoom. So you will be able to see her through the stream and also listen to her through the stream. We hope this works. But please go ahead, Tanya.
Thank you very much. And thank you for enabling this possibility to participate virtually. I really appreciate it. The title of my presentation is Art's Anticipated Motive. And my talk emerges from a foundational question, which is, how does let me see here. I need to share my screen, I'm sorry. Now I was so concerned with the sound. It seems that I cannot share my screen. Am I supposed to do that?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So we will share the slides from the inside of the auditorium.
Okay. So
I just need the cue for the next slide.
okay. So I say next.
Yes. Thank you.
Okay. Super. Good. Thank you. All right. So art's anticipative motive. Next. My talk emerges from a foundational question, which is, how does media art engage with our current co-evolvement with techniques? And this I will explore with attention to a motive of anticipation in media art and in contemporary digital culture. And this is motivated by a concern I have with how art experience stimulates anticipative emotions in humans in perspective of our current digital reality, which I argue is evolving or transitioning with respect to our theme today, especially through an anticipative technocultural drive. So with regards to art, anticipation in this respect is not directly a matter of artistic intentionality, but it concerns an emotional drive that goes deeper. Next. I am not an art historian, but a curator and a theorist on art and media in the context of modern and contemporary culture. So it's not really my mandate to try to identify a new turn or a new artistic movement. Also, maybe that's not so interesting, but I would like to take off in a recently revived attention in contemporary art that I think should interest us. And that's an orientation towards the future. Next. And perhaps this speaks to some sort of intratemporal concern for the future, the possible, what comes next. And these are just some of the many recent future-oriented exhibition contexts that I've come across in my research. So some questions that this picture raises are, why is the orientation towards the future so momentous? In perspective of media art, what motivates the future orientation? Can the future orientation in art be understood as a genuine intent of art, or as if isolated from fields of technological innovation and intentionalities that are inherent in these? And also on a more critical note, perhaps, what kinds of future drives are being solicited by art? Next. The revived attention to the future can be said to have evolved from a particular trajectory in lieu of time-based art practices, whereby technology and medium enable the inscription of the spectator in different experiences of time. For example, those temporalities or temporal modes that are listed here, which I've compiled with the help from Christine Ross's examination on art and temporality. And some of these temporal modes suspend linear temporal experience and might be examined as aesthetic reactions to the forwardness of the modern era. That is Ross's suggestion when she speaks about art in the 60s in particular. In any case, if contemporary art is a pivotal site of temporal experimentation, then what does that mean to our experience of art and the role that art pursues and gains as a site or locus for human imagination, realization, and reflection, if we think art has anything to do with that? So next. So now, the future orientation is not just a theme we encounter in the representation of contemporary art in exhibition spaces. We can also locate this where art meets technology and science, or we might also say where technology and science embrace the art, where media art is increasingly becoming a protagonist. And here's just a very quick glimpse into this landscape. Next. And this is, as many of us here in this space are well aware, it's not just some experimentation that's going on in the periphery of the arts or the domain of technological innovation. They call art-driven use, experiments, and design under the Horizon Europe framework pays witness to art's manifested role in technological innovation and culture and funding schemes. And it falls under the program Human-Centered and Ethical Development of Digital and Industrial Technologies, which offers a budget of over 2 million euros for the 2021-2022 call period. And here it's not my aim to problematize this newly cast role for art in technological innovation schemes, but I mean to stress that art's role in relation to the future and its production in the realms of science and technological innovation is not just hypothetical, and it's not just peripheral, it's very real. Next. So if we turn to the broader discourse that feeds this investment in art, next. We can briefly focus on just one of these, the Ars Electronica Future Lab. Next. And in the concluding perspectives in the publication for the Future Lab's 25 years anniversary last year, you can read from the art side of this evolvement that the Future Lab started out as a pioneering project in 1996 in a technocultural context, fastly developing to transform everyday lives, and that its practices are now, compared to then, now they're considered mainstream. They were not back then. So it's also stressed how the art-science collaboration and the transdisciplinary culture that the Future Lab nurtures is to contribute to the future narratives that are described as urgently needed. So the future orientation is thus inherent in the artistic discourse and culture of interdisciplinary media art, at least since the 1990s. Next. So I want to just briefly anchor this movement more broadly in an understanding of art as, rather than something that is or that represents something that can be considered to be doing something. Art does. And this premise for art motivated a collaboratively edited publication in 2016 that I developed together with Susa Papp. And we can trace this perspective on art as doing in theories by, among others, Hannah Arendt, Maurice Merleau-Ponty, etc. What I'm tuning in on here is art's doing with respect to not only envisioning, problematizing, or proposing, but also producing our futures. Next. Now, is the future orientation today a continuation of futurism in art? Whether in the Italian futurist art movement of the early 20th century that celebrated the future by seeking to capture in art the dynamism, the energy, and the movement of the modern world and modern life, or the later critical orientation to the forwardness of the modern era that Christine Ross locates in art in the 1960s. In these movements, the future equals progress, or the modern era's forwardness. No, I will argue that media art's future orientation is not simply either confirming or resisting a utopian desire. Maybe our perceptual lenses when we're looking at art or examining it or exhibiting it, I don't know. But I think we need to redirect our focus and search for another motive in art that concerns the future. Next. The interesting thing here is not the future destinations that art offers or is used to test or speculate upon, like proposing future scenarios for projecting better futures, this kind of lingo. It's also not the critical comment on future-driven regimes. Media art does more than make room for the reimagining of the future. Our focus could advantageously be directed on what the art does with regards to how, as closely entangled with human emotion and perceptions and imagination, it engages with cultural drives that are eventually deep anchored in human desires and aspirations from where our futures emerge. And I therefore suggest that what we direct our attention to search for is an anticipative motive in art, which relates to how the art may stimulate particular anticipative emotions in the human, and which is reflective of an anticipative cultural drive that shapes our technocultural reality today. Next. So anticipation as a concept is something in between acting in advance, foreseeing, and expecting. Anticipation takes place within a confined horizon of possibilities, the realm of the expectable, we could say. And this is different from imagination, which goes beyond what is perceived as possible, or the realm of the thinkable. Anticipation relates to how the mind constructs expectations from perceived possibilities, both those that are consciously and unconsciously held. Next. From an anthropological perspective, Arjun Abdurai has argued that anticipation will be an essential analytic lens for understanding the ways in which humans construct their cultural futures. So as an established phenomenon of inquiry in anthropology, anticipation is understood to be built into our emotions as pleasure or anxiety, uncertainty, hope, aspirations, or imaginaries through which we navigate our lives toward future events. And in that sense, every culture is driven by anticipation and would be impossible without it. Anticipatory experiences provides a locus for inquiry into the manifestations of futures in everyday life, the role future possibilities play in shaping the present. And I think the anthropological perspective can contribute to our understanding of what might be at stake with contemporary media art in terms of how the art is entangled with our current co-evolvement with techniques. Next. But first, just to clarify, I am not on the path of an anthropology of art approach, which is commonly understood as a subfield of social anthropology that studies art in different cultural contexts with a focus on historical and economic and aesthetic dimensions in non-Western art forms. So, for example, studying tribe art. And these resources that I'm showing pictures of here might give an impression of what I mean and also what I want to avoid, which is to cultivate the perspective of the Western anthropologist. Next. I would rather like to extend Abadurai's perspective that anticipation will be an essential analytic lens for understanding the ways in which humans construct their cultural futures with a techno-anthropological lens. So the recent fueling of human anticipation by data-driven digital technologies is a crucial aspect of understanding how we engage with our cultural futures in the 2020s through mechanisms of, for example, speculation and prediction. Our anticipative emotions are stimulated by data-driven technologies that cue our experience of reality and make one future scenario or next technical innovation more intuitive than another and maybe even possible. Next. And here I'm leaning on the philosopher Bernard Stiegler's questioning in Technics and Time of what kinds of anticipation particular technologies make possible by means of how technologies engage with human cognition and memory through temporal experience. And that is, technics does not concern a tool that we use, but a support system for deep anchored memory and cultural programs that we have evolved with since our human origin. Next. Stiegler grounds these ideas in the anthropology of Leroy Gohin, who challenges the conception of evolution history that humans depart from the monkeys and started with the growth of the brain. So rather than this, he says that the human begins with the feet, with freeing the hands and moving forward, and with making tools from flint, which was the beginning of human technicity and which changed forms of sociality and organization in groups. So humans develop language through the development and use of tools and has thus evolved with techniques since its origin. We externalize ourselves through our use of technology. We invent our world and we reconfigure our relation to our past and hence to the future, and also the other way around. We orientate ourselves to the future and reorganize our understanding of our past. So these perspectives understand techniques as something that we co-evolve with and a premise for our human relation to time and to the future. Next. So with reference to Stiegler and Leroy Gohin before, what kinds of anticipation do our particular technologies today make possible? My techno-anthropological observation in this context is that a cultural logic of anticipation permeates contemporary digital culture. And what might that mean? Next. We can say that with what is commonly referred to as new media follows a renewed interest in the future. And here I'm leaning on Mark Hansen, who argues in his book Feed Forward from 2015 that our primary media are changing from past directed recording platforms to data-driven anticipations of the future. By that, he refers to how electronic media have historically been recording technologies, inscribing data into archives of the past, data that is visible to us. But different from that, newer media collect data invisibly instead of archiving them for future reference, and they use this data to influence the present, the next moment, and the future. And this happens on the backdrop of a society extending from modernization that is increasingly reliant on risk calculation and prediction in its distribution of power and resources, which fuels a particular form of organizing power today. So governing happens through affording a state of affairs with the future or through framing the present as if it carries traces of the future. And we see that in, for example, predictive systems from search algorithms to riot or disaster prediction. And Elena Esposito and Ulrich Beck have written a lot more about this. So media increasingly stimulate our navigations and construct what can be anticipated and constructed as futures. Next. And we can say that there is a sense of futurity built into the functions of new media systems enacted by algorithmic procedures. As examples, we have Google search results that are customized by algorithms depending on your data history. And this example you see is from Eli Pariser, who compares two people's search on Egypt during the time of the Arab Spring. I couldn't make a better example myself. We see it in the Facebook newsfeed that is equally customized or curated by the underlying algorithm. We might also think of Netflix's what to watch next function or Amazon's book recommendations. These are driven by predictive analytics models, which I won't go further into here, but I think we know that this is happening. Next. In these processes, human and machinic levels of anticipation merge. So if at a human level, anticipation operates through emotional states of expectations and prospects, fears, and hopes, then at a machinic level, anticipation operates through data-driven processes of analytics and prediction. What we anticipate is not only informed by human preferences and reflections, but is increasingly informed by our temporal inscriptions in technological functionality, services, and logics. So you can ask yourself, why do we feel the urge to take a selfie, video call someone, or document and share the moment of watching Mount Fuji when you're actually there? Like this example illustrates, when we could as well just be enjoying the moment in peace. Who or what expects us to do that? What do we expect to get out of it? And how will the next technology that we buy or app that we download be designed to facilitate this behavior even better? Anticipation as human emotion is thus stimulated by technological functionality, and it also shapes technological functionality. Next. Machinic and human anticipative co-evolvement might be entering a new level of gravity. To illustrate this, I will very briefly visit a recently launched phenomenon, the metaverse. Next. The metaverse is, we can ask, is this just a second life for speculative advertisers? No. The metaverse, or metaverses, as multiple versions are currently being developed, not just the one by Meta, former Facebook, is a virtual 3D digital world that can be shared with a large number of people at the same time, anywhere, at any time. It's hyper-realistic, it's immersive, and it's interactive. It consists of virtual spaces that you can explore using an avatar you create. In the metaverse, you can play games, you can go shopping, hang out with friends at a virtual coffee shop, you can work with your colleagues in a virtual office, work remotely, fill out official paperwork, go to a virtual concert, or visit virtual museums to see digital artworks or media art. At least these opportunities will be available very soon. Next. Various predictive models come together in the metaverse. You don't interact with physical and tangible goods. You interact with digital assets and virtual environments that are composed of multiple layers of data. So we interact with data that can be cross-analyzed, compared, and extracted to form new assets and environments, and which is also generated in that way. The technologies and predictive models that support the immersive experience in the metaverse involve blockchain, augmented reality, virtual reality, 3D reconstruction, artificial intelligence, and the Internet of Things, among other new concepts, I'm sure, which are integrated into a world of anticipative media architecture. And this extends beyond the virtual environment and informs new technological innovations as well. We see already in video games, for example, how the data requirements of these real-time decentralized networks are being adapted, and which also lead to more complementary devices that enhance the experience of the metaverse. And some have pointed at a boom in demand of VR headsets and services already, which are also applied, connected with metaverses in a range of industries, including fashion, music, education, sports, and other domains. Next. So maybe this is just a fad, or maybe it's just a rescue plan for Mark Zuckerberg. But with the launch of the metaverse, the global market for augmented reality and virtual reality is forecasted to reach close to $300 billion in 2024, rising from $30.7 billion in 2021. So from 30 to $300 billion in 4 years. Maybe it won't go that far, but still. We might explain this rapid evolvement of a phenomenon partly by the COVID-19 pandemic that has accelerated the interest in digital presence, and with that also in developing metaverses. But we might also explain it by an anticipative cultural drive whereby humans create technology to meet our anticipations for the future. And I visit the metaverse as a techno-anthropological phenomenon that demonstrates how technocultural anticipative drives can fast be changing our everyday world. So when we engage with media art, I think it is necessary to simultaneously reflect on the cultural dynamics that the art emerges from and responds to. And I think it's necessary to pay attention to how human emotion is cued to fuel such dynamics in order to grasp what might be at the essence of the art experience. Next. So, and I'm reaching my conclusion here. As art is not only reflective of, but also contingent with its contemporaneity and the cultural dynamics that drive it, I suggest that we search for media art's anticipative motive, whether it's explicit or implicitly expressed. And in the image here, you see the artwork Prima Materia, a stereoscopic audiovisual journey created by NoLab and presented at the Ars Electronica Deep Space in 2021, which I won't go into, but which speaks to transformation of our times, transitions of our times. And this artwork is also co-funded by the Creative Europe program, by the way. The Deep Space, which is a room that presents multiple new and adapted 3D media artworks in the same format or on the same stage, might itself be a venue for excavating anticipative emotions in relation to media arts experience that could be explored further in another talk. Next. So to finally reach my conclusion, how are artworks anticipative? Not by means of utopian drives, for example, speculating on future scenarios, but through exploring the cultural temporal drives between humans and machines that affect emotions of anticipation in the human. Maybe art can help us to better understand how, before our actions, our anticipative emotions and intuitions are deeply entangled with and eventually co-constituted of our futures to come. Next. My current research project, titled Art of Our Times, is about exploring these temporal drives across artworks. So if I'm re-invited next year, I'll give you a lot of examples of how artworks actually deal with these temporalities. But my focus is on how art works with the parameters and desires that will take us there. So on a very final note, I want to share some questions that I'm battling with, which might be of use to some. How does art's experience shuffle past, present, and future, not only by its technological functionality, but also by means of perceptual imaginary stimulation? Which temporalities, machinic and human, does the art experience engage? How does the art cater to human anticipative emotion, present and deep? And I do think that art can help us to better understand how, before our actions, our anticipative emotions and intuitions are deeply entangled with techniques and eventually co-constitutive of the future, the possible, what comes next. So that point will be my final note and contribution to our conversation today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tanya. Very nice. And we will discuss after the final panelist, who is coming on stage now. It's Alessandro Ludovico, and I'm just passing the sound equipment to you.
Should work. Yeah, okay. Am I supposed to wear it? Can you? Am I supposed to wear it? Okay. Speaking of futures and future equipment, okay. Okay. Thank you very much. Hi, Tanya. Indeed, thank you very much for including me in this first Scandinavian Laser Talk. It's, of course, an honor to be here today. It's nice how what I prepared somehow fits with both the previous presentation, at least I hope, in some way. And I got particularly inspired by the translation regime's text, but I will come back to that later. Let me just briefly summarize two of the main things that have been involved. Currently, I'm part of the AMT, Archaeology of Media and Technology, which is a research group at the Winchester School of Art, University of Southampton. Yeah, we research actually mostly what is called archaeology, media archaeology, archaeology media. So looking at ideas in the past that have been somehow not properly investigated, or they just didn't happen because they were too early, or they just didn't work properly at some point. So it's kind of, I would connect with the anticipation that Tanya was talking about before, that resonates, I think, in the whole media archaeology field. And of course, probably all of you know that I'm the chief editor, and thanks for reminding it, Morten, of Neural Magazine, first issue of 93. This is the last one, 2021. Well, we always tried to investigate the ideas behind media art through the artists who have developed media art, especially new media art, since we started in the early 90s. And here I'm connecting also to what Mogens was talking about, in terms that the main idea in the beginning was to have a magazine which was a node in a network. This was the main idea leading us back then. But let's get to the topics of today. So the cultures computing, thanks a lot for sharing this text. Was particularly interesting, not only because it was letting me jump for a little bit back in time in 96, but Susan Lee defines this transition regime of information, which actually, I mean, reading them, I felt like they were written like 2 days ago, not really in 1996. But there was one specific sentence that I would like to quote when she says, "The expanding and nearly ubiquitous presence of networked information technology of all sorts has raised serious questions about where you live and work." And the key of this whole sentence, I mean, it sounds like, yeah, okay, we know that. I mean, we are already experienced that. We have heavily experienced that over the last 2 years of pandemic. But the key word, the key word for me in this whole sentence is where. Where you live and work, which to me immediately associates with when you live and work. And it's key because, of course, I mean, the networked information is something we have already metabolized. We have the networked information. I have it working with me in my pocket. All of you have that one that you can reach with your hand almost any time for you, whatever device. But the point is where exactly we are and when we are where we are. And so the space and time coordinates, which are resonating for me so often. And that's already connecting back to 96. So why it was so important for this author, and was so important also for all of us, probably back then. Because the shift, the change, the switch that we had from having a non-networked yet world, in which we founded our space and time, negotiated still with all the media, switched to a world that was all of a sudden in real time and with a shared space which we couldn't see the end of. And 1996 was still a time that we consider in transition for the new massive adopted digital technologies. I mean, I'm not trying to make, I mean, the history of media, or even less, of course, the history of media art here, but to have some references. 96 was in transition because, I mean, if you look at what was happening, we have this crucial moment when in early 90s, there are some companies producing virtual reality for the masses equipment, even if they were extremely rough in terms of technology. Offered just a few years later, 93, we have the internet for the masses that starts to be spread. And in 95, we have the first big peak of internet users, which means that a substantial amount of people were already experiencing this networked world. And so this shift of space and time, but not really as we are experiencing today. So that's interesting for me, that its author already felt what was anticipating, as Tanya was mentioning, what actually was about to happen, because it was really possible to feel it, but it was still a transition. We could say that now we are in a very different condition. So the 21st century starts with the pervasiveness of digital. When we reach year 2000 and a few years after, the digital starts to be everywhere. I mean, if we look around where we are now, we can find a lot of technology that wasn't so accessible and so networked and so powerful back then. So it starts with that. But then, when did the post-digital start? Because we feel, or we have been said also that we already live in the post-digital, and I would say that we have been told that quite a while ago. And I do think it's actually true that we can even argue that we are in a kind of post-digital, but I mean, with the game of definitions, as with all the possible definition of art and technology, we can go on forever. The main thing is that when this pervasiveness of digital starts to really generate a flood in terms of space and time, and when this flood, in a way, stabilize, and we feel that we are living in times which are, if not dictated, but heavily influenced from digital. So when the post-digital start? Well, actually, the very first time it is mentioned, almost by accident, is exactly the beginning of 20th century. Year 2000, there's this quite famous paper, for me quite important, called The Aesthetics of Failure, Post-Digital Tendencies in Contemporary Computer Music. It's written by a musician, Kim Cascone. Actually, he's talking specifically here about how his compositional methods, which are made out of making micro samples of music and sequencing them, it's generating a new approach, a different perception of the digital environment. And what is this perception? No, let me say something. No, I was asking you. Let me say something about this. What is this perception? This perception, he says clearly, in a clear way in this paper, to be less, I'm kind of quoting it, be less obsessed by being surrounded by wonderful and gorgeous devices and toys, and letting the receipts of digital just to surround us. So he's hoping that this will happen, because then we will be very aware of the digital times and we could act accordingly. We could start to behave accordingly in a kind of, I think that probably Cascone was thinking very positively, in a kind of symbiosis with the digital. Well, I don't think that 22 years after we are exactly there, but media art has told a lot about it. We have seen it. Mons was showing some beautiful works from my own opinion. I mean, every time that we talk about media artworks, we can see these two specific categories, the perception of time and the perception of space. Tanya was also mentioning the Ars Electronica, incredible environment made by multiple screens juxtaposed that makes a kind of life-size immersive environment without wearing any additional device. The point is that for me, when we enter the word media in the equation of art, then the perception of time and the perception of space somehow changes. And I would like to give just three examples about three different statements related to that. The first one, and this is the most recent one, it's from an American artist, Daniel Temkin, who is working a lot with code. Actually, he's investigating a lot programming languages, as environments through which, okay, now I can hear me back, through which to code possibly reality, maybe, okay, to code possibly reality. He made this series of modified photographs called Straightened Trees. What he's doing is actually to reprogram the photograph itself. We can say easily it is computational photography, something that every smartphone now is doing in a different way. What it does is to straighten the tree in the picture, and everything else is then reprogrammed to be consistent with the straightening of the tree. As you can see, the perception of space completely changes. He's putting the tree in the very middle. The focus is on one tree compared to all the others, but then the whole rest is completely distorted. And we can even say, as it happens with photography, that also the perception of the time when especially this picture has been shot changes accordingly somehow. Okay. And there's another very important aspect about media art. I'm confident that both Mons and Tanya might agree with it, that media art is technically ephemeral. I'm sure that every artist, Mons has long experience with that. I'm sure he has experienced obsolescence and failures. So this ephemerality of producing media art is very different from the materiality of traditional art, which is also subject to the law of time. Of course, it corrupts. I was noticing that Tanya was showing the Umberto Boccioni sculpture and was so precise in the credit to say that was the recasting that Tate did in 1972 after getting authorization, because the original one we probably don't have anymore. We don't have anymore the original. So what I mean is that even with art objects, we always have this problem of preservation, but with media art is particularly dramatic because it's technically ephemeral. And it's not meant to be stored for a long time. This is my personal take. Of course, we can talk about that. It's quite a bold statement, maybe, but I do think that using especially digital technologies for creating artworks, it's a twist towards the technology itself, which is not as a mission, but as a technical infrastructure. It is meant to perform calculations rather than preserve information for a long time. So if it is ephemeral, media art is closer to performance art than sculpture. I mean, again, this is a quite general statement, very questionable. But I think that especially when digital pure digital forms, computational media are involved, then the performing of calculations, which is a process again that happens in time and space, makes it closer to something that happens during a certain amount of time and in some defined space. And it's something that makes it closer to performative qualities rather than objective, material qualities. Okay. And to give another example, this is quite, well, maybe it's not so known, especially to younger generations. So it's nice to show it. It's the performance called Hall in Space, which was done by Kit Galloway and Sherry Rabinowitz in 1980. For me, it's a very illuminating social experiment. I mean, now it would sound completely trivial now that I will explain it, especially again to younger generations. But at that time, it was quite well crafted. So the two artists are really absent physically, and you won't know it was them until they revealed it was them doing it. What they did in 1980 was to rent a satellite connection to connect two different spaces in the United States. A mall in Century City, which was one of at the outskirts of Los Angeles, and at the entrance of New York Public Library. They rent the satellite connection in order to project one place to the other in two big screens with camera and microphones. We could say, I mean, we are on Zoom, so we could say it was probably one of the first public Zoom call that we would have ever had. But they did it without saying a word, without announcing it, without any kind of press release or announcement of any kind. They just technically made it happen. Both the very expensive satellite connection thanks to private sponsors, and they had these two big screens, and then they wanted to see what happened. And then people going to the mall on one side and people going to the library on the other side started to notice the screen with people in it. And then, which is something that we as humans are keen sometimes to do, one started to wave. And one on the other side thought, maybe it's waving at me. Maybe not, and replied to the wave. And then a conversation started. And that was almost at the end of the first day. Then the connection at some point, of course, switched off. And the other day, through word of mouth, people started to gather in these two places. And they started to talk to each other. Where are you? What time is there? Are you really in New York? Can you prove you are in New York? So our perception of time and space in this specific environment, which was brand new in 1980, was negotiated and brought a lot of social energy. During the third day, which was meant to be the last day, there were crowds there. There were relatives who haven't seen each other for years, and finally they could see each other and wave to each other. I mean, there were quite dramatic, also positive and maybe also negative scenes on the two sides. But again, the concept of space and time, our presence in space, how we perceive our surroundings was redefined in a very spontaneous way, as a social experiment. So I would argue, again, very questionable as everything else I'm saying, but I would argue that media art is more experiential and processual than contemplative. And I think this is a very important quality. Both of them, experiential in terms that we need to be engaged in a media artwork because it involves these two coordinates. And this processual, especially the digital, because it involves a process of information on one side, and more often now, the process happens through a specific infrastructure, which is a networked infrastructure. And the last example that I want to bring is the long performance. I mean, it hasn't stopped yet, which is going on since 2007 on 3 Slovenian artists who changed their name. Their artwork is that they changed their name legally, and I mean, until they will change it back, which hasn't happened except for one. The 3 of them changed their name legally with the name of the Prime Minister of Slovenia. Then their whole life, every public act that they were doing, that they are doing, that they have done over the last 15 years, can be misinterpreted when reported by the media, or when remediated somehow as an act of the Prime Minister. So this is one of the 3 persons with his own ID. His own ID becomes a work of art. His passport becomes a work of art. When these guys have published a book of memories, like a biography, that biography has become a work of art because they could make a biography that mixed facts from the Prime Minister and themselves. And everything was done by Janez Janša, which is the name of the Prime Minister. Nobody could sue them because of that, because they were saying the real fact by real persons. The only problem, it was that were different persons with the same name. Again, this brings identity questions and qualities, but again, it's experiential, and it's going on since there. I mean, they have made plenty of actions and works. Think just about credit cards with their own names. I mean, with the same name and things like that. But again, it's experiential, and it's also somehow processual, because all the actions that they have been able to enable, it's because of processes that they have started somehow. So, last, I think, or one of the last sentences I would like to pose is that media art is more about giving open access and create networks rather than producing objects. Open access, because these, think for a moment about the last example, Janez Janša. They were able to enable their own processes because they had access to a series of bureaucratic and non-bureaucratic infrastructure. They were open, as well as the space shared by the people in Los Angeles on one side and New York on the other side was open, and was open for anybody literally to join. And the other important quality that I was mentioning in the beginning is network. In all these examples, we can say that the network is extremely important. I think that that characterizes media art in a very specific way. Yeah, the very last example I would like to make is another artwork, which goes back to the first quote that I was making, in a way to close the circle, 1997 to 99, the Bureau of Inverse Technology, which was a group of a few people, 2 mainly, made this work called the Bit Plane. Well, today we would say it was a drone, but at that time there were no drone. Just think that 20 years ago there were no drones. But they made a plane, actually, a small plane, which was able to fly for a certain amount of time. And they attached the camera on it, I mean, it was not a plane like a commercial plane. It was a very amatorial, small plane, this size, basically, with a camera attached, and it was flying over Silicon Valley. You have to know that Silicon Valley, of course, has plenty of no-fly zone. There are even on top, I think there still are, on top of big brands like Apple, for example, and they are sending radio signals through the top in order to block any kind of wiretapping. So any possible signals that goes out or that might try to get in these mythical factories and headquarters has to be in a way blocked or disturbed. So they document it just with this very amatorial thing that they just realized it could fly for a while. And the camera record all of it. And the camera is also recording all these disturbances that happen on some of the factories. Again, it was possible because these two artists were able to use their network in order to understand the technologies needed to make it happen. And it's reclaiming the openness of the space. The openness of the space where an amatorial object like this can just fly through and document what is behind. Oops, and that was it. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Alessandro. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much, Alessandro. Thank you, Tanya. And thank you, Mo, as well. Time has progressed quite a lot, so we won't have time for kind of a Q&A. But I think I will kind of sum up a little bit with a few things. The premise was to look at if media art in some ways could be replacing the term computer, the cultures of computer in Susan Lee Starr's original text from 1996. We have had these wonderful proposals from you, Mons, from Tanya, and from Alessandro, talking about how these changes, these transitions, what they actually signify. And I think one of the things, and this maybe also shows that I'm an art historian, somehow feeds into the question of when does something require or can show to become part of an art world, part of a world even. And I think the discussion of distinctions between what is media art and what is art and technology, as you point out, Moens, which is maybe also you could say a more neutral background to discuss the premise of having this mediated art forms coming into focus as ways of critique, as ways of representing something that is in transition. And as you, Tanya, as well, you are looking at these ways of anticipating, you could say. I mean, this idea also of what is actually expected from art in a way, which also speaks to a question of how we are entangling and how we are speaking to what we call art in a way. And media and technology, whether we use the one or the other, I think there is something that we need to do, which I also find in Susan Lee Starr's text, which is to ask how does it implicate us? What are we? What are our practices? What are they leading to through these different practices? And I think we will not end at a conclusion at this panel, but I hope, and I think with you, Alessandra, as well, the opening up of how can we distribute this, how can this become part of what we are and what we do, that this will lead to further discussions about what the media art cultures and also computational cultures actually how they are operating in our society and our social entanglements. So with these words, I will say thank you to you, Mogens, and to you, Tanya, down on the screen. And to you, Alessandro, thank you so much for being here and for sharing your wonderful practices with us. And let's continue. I'm sorry to say to you out there behind the screens that you cannot participate in the opening of the temporary library of publications about media art in Denmark, but this is happening now in Aalborg after we close the screens. But thank you so much for being here with us as well, out on the net. And so this is the concluding remark. Thank you so much.